Okay, so I'm delighted to welcome Noel Lai-Kit to the podcast today. Noel, you are the Head of Services Procurement at the London Stock Exchange Group, and I'm delighted to have you here with me today in London Bridge. Thank you very much for joining me. How are you doing?
Very good, Johnny. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here. And it's my first podcast, so please be gentle.
Excellent. Well, it's great, and I'm really pleased to have you joining me in this conversation. You've got some really interesting insights to bring into the conversation in the market. And as I always say, we need more people talking about this stuff. And the more dialogue and conversation and the more people, more voices like yours that can be heard, it's just helpful for the industry as a whole because it just brings the conversation out into the open. And, the thing I really like about people like yourself is you're not kind of walking around saying, hey, I've got all the answers. It's more like telling stories about your journey and what you're seeing and the challenges that you faced and the things that you're working on around services procurement. And I think that's what's interesting for other people to be able to listen to.
Very good.
So what I want to start off by doing is just having a little look at your background, because one of the things I find interesting about you and your role and what you're doing is the kind of combination of different elements and skills and capabilities that go into making you who you are and your approach to what you do. So you didn't actually start off specifically in procurement, did you? Did you want to just talk through your kind of journey so far through from education through to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you say, I didn't leave college, or I wasn't a teenager going, I want to have a career in procurement. It kind of, as I said, it just happened naturally, actually. So when I go back to my school days, choosing a university, I enjoyed business studies at A-levels. So I decided to go in to do business studies at university. Found I really enjoyed that, and finance was my thing. So I went down a finance route at university, went into accountancy. My first job was in finance ultimately. Worked for various companies, Apple worked for them for a couple of years, working my way through. Worked for King's College London, and I found myself at Sony PlayStation so various different industries. So manufacturing for Sony PlayStation when they were going through fantastic growth. And then I went into architecture and a building architectural firm. Did that for 4 years, worked my way up to a financial controller there at a company called LDY. And from that point, somebody who I knew worked for Thomson Reuters at the time, and this was back in 2011, and said, oh, do you want to come and join us at Thomson Reuters? So, which was quite interesting, actually, because it was my first kind of step away from pure accounting and looking after the P&L. Where this was really working in their technology function at Thomson Reuters. And she kind of, the role was really a bit of a business analyst. So I was kind of, it's a bit weird. It feels like a demotion. But she said, look, this place, there's so much change and there's different opportunities. So come in and do this, see how you get on. And if you do well, there'll be opportunities. And my word, was she right? Because 15 years later, there's been so much change. Firstly, in terms of the company we worked for. So the financial division of Thomson Reuters was acquired by Blackstone in 2017-18, creating a company called Refinitiv, before the London Stock Exchange Group, who I will now refer to as LSEG from here on in, acquired Refinitiv and integrated that from 2021. So in terms of my career growth or changes and growth, I was, as a business analyst in Thomson Reuters in their technology team, looking after about $500 million of spend it was at the time, focused on the telco network and how we were integrating that into our huge customer network of financial services, the banks, the traders, everyone that's trading would be a lot at the time would be using a Reuters terminal. So managing that estate from a business analyst point of view, understanding all of the detail within those inventories, and we were also charging an element back to our clients. That evolved, and someone said, actually, do you want to do some contract management, some supplier management, and looking after the revenue piece of it as well, in terms of the contracts that were going out to our customers. So I was like, oh yeah, okay, let's give that a go.
Give that a go.
And so when Refinitiv was created, they looked at it and said, okay, well actually what you're doing there is more kind of source and procurement work. So we're going to split our team in half. Some of them stayed in the technology division, doing vendor management, and the rest of us went into the sourcing procurement organisation. And I was at that point looking after the network technology, as I was previously, with actually a slightly reduced remit because some of the contract management, supply management piece stayed within the function. And that was good fun. And then again, what happens is the person that was looking after technology services moved into a different role outside of procurement. And I remember getting a phone call, and I was in a car park at the time. And my boss at the time rang me and said, "Look, Noel, do you want to pick up tech services alongside what you're doing today?" And I was like, "Well, no, I don't really have any experience of doing tech services procurement." He was like, "That's fine, no, don't worry, it's only people. You'll be fine." So yeah, I took that on, and it evolved. And as LSEG were working through the acquisition of Refinitiv, again, there was a new CPO that was taking the team, and there was various roles. So they broke the team the function into 3 sourcing towers plus the SRM and the supply relationship management and the operations function that works across. So the towers are broken down at the time, and we were working during integration on how to set the operating model, and we looked at it in 3 lenses. So there was a technology tower, a services tower, and a corporate tower. Technology, software, hardware, infrastructure, cloud. Services procurement was looking at the tech services is a big part of what we do, along with consulting and contingent labour contractors. So I broke my team down to those 3 areas, and the third tower was corporate, which is looking after the functions such as finance, HR, legal, etc. Yes, and where I am now, so just recently, literally hot off the press, last month, my role was expanded again to consolidate from those 3 towers I just mentioned, technology, services and corporates. So we've still got a technology tower, and then we've consolidated services and corporate into one. So I think the new team is called Services and Corporate Procurement. But yeah, I take ideas in terms of a more apt name for this area.
I think it's very apt, and that's one of the cornerstones of this conversation is just an understanding of that recognition of why you and your organisation have come to logically view the world in this way, where you've specifically had a focus to say this is how we procure services. And I think that's really interesting, because I feel like that's kind of at the head of the curve, really, in terms of the market maturity around how people procure services. And it's very interesting to see that. And like I say, looking at your job title, Head of Services Procurement, it's like that's something we're starting to see more. But I still feel like it's, you're one of the your company are one of the earlier adopters of that sort of approach. But just before we kind of come into that, I always find it fascinating. Like, a lot of procurement people didn't necessarily set out to say, I'm going to follow a career in procurement. Although I would say now there are more courses popping up.
Yes.
Like there's a I think it's an MSc at Portsmouth University, for example, in strategic procurement. And there's some really good courses propping up, and there are more situations now where people are saying, I'm going to follow a career in procurement. Whereas it just wasn't really like that a few years ago, was it? Most people were kind of like coming at it from different angles, which I find quite interesting. Like, it wasn't something you necessarily expected to end up in.
No, and I think a lot of my colleagues and peers the same have had a similar journey in terms of coming from maybe an IT specialist or maybe from the legal area, and have kind of evolved into procurement. So I think what is so fantastic about working in procurement, especially an organisation that values procurement, and I think we've not had to fight for a seat at the table. We're given a seat at the table, which is really, really good. But ultimately, I love procurement because it's so varied from day to day. There's so much different pieces you work on. And again, I always fall back on my finance background. I find it quite easy to do deals and to understand the complexities around the numbers around a deal. But then working and working with legal, working with an IT specialist, an engineer or some kind of technician, and working with the people, the HR people function, you just get to understand different specialisms and different functions, and actually what I love about services procurement is that I literally work across the whole organisation. I'm group wide in the sense of working with the functions, working with the businesses, and working with the IT, our huge IT team. So yeah, I love the variety of what the job brings, and our company loves change as well. One of our values is change. So it just
that's interesting.
So having the change keeps me occupied and energized, really, in terms of being part of the change that we're delivering to our customers.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, let's face it. In the world today, the market that we're operating in, change is a constant, isn't it? You can't avoid it. Those organisations that can't adopt a change mentality or have the anti-change mentality, I mean, just going to get left behind.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's absolutely key. I find it really interesting. I have definitely encountered situations where people will tell me, some people in procurement will specifically avoid services because it's too complex and it's too varied. And if they're working in a particular buying category of, goods or materials, which is, super structured and very mature, it's a different kind of role.
Yeah.
So I think for me, services procurement is where the problem solvers exist or have to exist. And it's quite dynamic. And also it has this very broad remit within the business, which is what I find interesting, that you started out with an interest in business studies.
Yes.
So that is obviously going to give you a broad understanding of what the business is trying to achieve, how the strategy filters down to all the different departments, and how everything kind of loops up to make that business successful. And that is something that I've heard many high quality procurement executives talk about with regards to services, is the most critical thing is an understanding of the business. Because ultimately, the way that the services that you procure are almost like an extension of how that business gets stuff done. So it's kind of got to align with the strategy, really, hasn't it?
100%. And I think whenever I get involved in an activity, especially, and we ultimately will get involved in a contractual piece and what a commercial construct will look like. But putting that kind of technical side aside, it's what's the outcome we're trying to achieve, and what is the business objective we're trying to do? How is this going to help our customers? And then you can start talking about the commercials and how that fits into what will be in a contract with a supplier at the end of the day. But ultimately, it's what's the outcome you're trying to achieve, and how do you get there?
Yeah. So it's interesting you mentioned thinking about the outputs or outcomes and how that's going to affect your customers. So obviously that's LSEG's customers.
Yes.
But also you've got two customer bases effectively, or maybe even three. You've got your customers that are LSEG's customers. You've got your internal buying stakeholders that are your customers. And to a certain extent, you've got your supplier customer base as well to think about. So you have to be very conscious of how that interaction is affecting, I guess, all three groups.
Yes, 100%. I think, and again, that's one of the reasons why I love being in procurement, because you're continually trying to problem solve and find out how do you, and it's not just about pleasing and satisfying those customers, because ultimately we want to be a good, strong business partner, and that means sometimes challenging and prodding and making sure that we're doing the right thing. But yeah, trying to navigate that triangle is it's not easy, but it's part of the fun ultimately.
Yeah, and if you've got a focus on it, specifically from a services procurement angle, I personally think that is one step further in the evolution, or maybe more than one step further in the evolution than exists within a lot of organisations. I think every organisation is going to need to do things in a slightly different way, but having a focus on how you buy services takes into account the nature of services, because they are different. They change, they're complicated, they're hard to define, all those sorts of things, which are challenges for you guys in procurement, and also challenges for your internal stakeholders, and obviously for your supply chain as well. But I'll come back to that in a minute. But just continuing with looking at your journey, one of the things that I find fascinating is in your journey through kind of accounting, business analysis, and then procurement, and then a refinement in procurement. What is involved in all stages of that? Well, one is data, an understanding of data and numbers and being able to use that, but also it's problem solving. And you mentioned that's one of the things that keeps you engaged and that you find interesting about it is the problem solving angle. I personally feel that kind of adaptability, in my experience of talking to a decent number of services procurement specialists, I think that's something that comes up a lot. That kind of adaptability. Do you think that is particularly relevant to the type of things that you're buying and the way you have to work?
Yeah, I think so, because yeah, I do, and it's a tough one to answer and actually trying to articulate. But yeah, I think we are always problem solving, and especially in services procurement, you're always you're always trying to understand, well, what's your requirement, what are you looking to achieve, and then how you get there. But ultimately, sometimes the hardest thing that a stakeholder, whether it's internal or external, is struggling to do is articulate what's their requirement, what they're trying to achieve, what's their outcome they're trying to get to. And then we can help them navigate that and document it, so that actually before we start engaging with a supplier, sometimes you can do it in a different way, where you bring the supplier in to help do that early bit of problem solving. But ultimately, you're trying to simplify a difficult and complex problem, and that's where I think procurement can be really helpful, because we've got these highly intelligent people who are specialists in their function or business unit or technology, and we're trying to simplify it as much as possible, so we can actually take it to a supplier to say, okay, this is what we now need, or we need you to help us build or provide to us that we can build it.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. But this whole idea of defining the requirement and this kind of like what a lot of people seem to struggle with, the kind of like starting with a blank page.
Yeah.
And it requires procurement to help the stakeholders in terms of structure and content. Well, you need to make sure you're including this sort of thing. You need to include assumptions and milestones and dependencies and whatever it may be. But that's just the kind of scope of requirements. The legal side of it, that's kind of in your probably fairly standard T's and C's or whatever you negotiate with a particular supplier, which might have been done in their MSA, I guess, at that point.
Yeah.
But that's almost, the stakeholder almost doesn't need to worry about that, do they? They need to worry about what is it you're asking to do and what is the outcome that you want to get.
Yeah.
And that's people do find that hard to articulate, don't they?
Massively, because it's and sometimes, honestly, sometimes you're not sure. You're on a journey.
Yes.
AI is a good example. AI is it could be such a vague term, and ultimately, it's what are you trying? And you just have to look at it maybe in cycles and go, okay, what milestones do you need to get to look at the broader picture? Because technology, for example, is changing every day, and you don't want to go on a journey that actually then you can't change. You can't.
Yeah.
You lose the flexibility to navigate. So ultimately, you're trying to guide them with some structure, but ultimately get them to the end point that they need to get to, which is not simple, which is not easy.
No, so it's interesting. So just picking up on a couple of things you mentioned there, it's particularly in technology projects. I mean, in the world of services procurement, in my experience, IT and technology is the biggest area of spend, followed by probably engineering services, consulting, that sort of thing. Those are the biggest areas of spend that organisations are addressing at this moment. Obviously, there are lots of other areas of spend, whether it be marketing services, legal services, etc. But if you take technology services, for example, those projects are working in kind of an agile process sometimes, where it's iterative sprints, and we see that in terms of sometimes deliverables might be a sprint.
Yes.
In an agile process where it's saying we'll get to point one, then we'll reassess it, scope out stage two. Yeah. So I think that kind of maps in very well with the actual process. Yeah. And it's also interesting when you talk about the supply chain getting involved in helping define those scopes of work. For some organisations, that is a real big problem in the sense that there's sort of like no control over it. Yeah. And the suppliers are basically, I've heard the phrase marking their own homework too many times, where nothing's bid and all that sort of stuff. But that's the kind of potential downside of if it's completely unfettered and totally unmanaged. Yeah. But if you're actually getting into a project where you go, we need specialist input for this, then it's a benefit to get the supplier to help, surely.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, look, when we've all got our subject matter expertise, Right? And I think we all need to appreciate actually when we don't have that expertise, or when you maybe have the expertise but you need to maybe check your homework yourself, and you want you to have a benchmark.
Yeah.
Is always good. It's no different to what you do when you're building an extension in your house. You might have an idea of what you want, but actually it's nice to get an architect to actually help you put that down and print for you. So I think being able to bring in an external company who's, I'll give an example of when you're putting in a new EPM, enterprise performance management tool. Yeah, for example, when you're bringing in a new EPM, enterprise performance management tool, you'll be doing this once every 10, 15, 20 years.
Right.
Well, actually, sometimes you might need advice from a company who is implementing these, 20 a year. So they will have that knowledge that you won't have on experiences of what can go right, what goes right and what goes wrong in these kind of programs and projects, that you can then take the expertise and build it into yours, understanding that every implementation is unique or can be unique. You can actually take their advice and their experience and build that into your project plan. Doesn't mean you need their help actually implementing it, but actually having their knowledge could be the game changer that actually helps your implementation.
That's a great example, and it actually reminds me. One of my good buddies, Carl, he runs a high-end bespoke building firm, and one of the things he's starting to do now is he's starting to do consulting on the side. So he basically does kind of like luxury high-end residential, and it's really interesting. Like in terms of him providing just advice for people as a separate thing, he's got like decades of experience of doing this. So when he's talking to someone who's building their dream home, most people, if they're lucky enough to get the chance to do that, it's only going to be once in a lifetime.
Indeed. Yeah.
He's doing it 4 times a year for the last 30 years.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting, and like subject matter expertise is so valuable, and particularly in areas like technology where it's changing so fast, and keeping up with, for example, the latest cyber regulations and threats and things like that. Yeah. Even your well-educated internal stakeholder is not necessarily going to have the expert level knowledge to spec out a requirement in the detail that's needed. But the thing I like and value about what you guys are doing is you're documenting it. Yes. You're capturing it, because that is the big problem for a lot of organizations. And what they'll often end up with is something that's poorly defined or undefined, or just completely the supplier just saying, this is what I'm going to do and this is how much it's going to cost, with no attention to it whatsoever. And then you might have one line on a purchase order, and then maybe an SOW that's like a signed, scanned PDF that's in a document repository somewhere, and it might have captured some milestones. They might change, but it's not following through. It's not a live document, and it's not in a live process. Yeah. Which I think where organisations, that's where the services can kind of hit a bit of a brick wall and just become invisible. Yeah, yeah. I like to think, at LSEG now we've got a strong framework in place, which just kind of helps us manage the delivery of whatever it may be in a way where you're balancing the need to get stuff done with strong financial management, and that's sometimes it can create some healthy friction along the way, because you've got a function or a business who want to crack on and get their stuff done, and you've got to just kind of hold the reins a little and constructively say, well, actually you need to think about this in a slightly different way. We'll still get to your outcome. You might just need to take an extra a couple of weeks to plan this out, but when we do that, you'll save time at the end of it and manage your budgets effectively along the way. Avoid things like settlements. There we go. And it's something that comes up a lot. It's something that Nick Everett, who had a podcast conversation with recently, she brought that up as an area in particular, where it's like, if you just have this kind of, if you don't have things clearly defined and clearly agreed, and you don't take the time to get it right up front, you just get the problems downstream, don't you? 100%. It's like again, I always refer back to a building project, and I did my last one 5 years ago, and hopefully I won't be doing one for a few years yet. But again, it's how long you spend maybe with the architect up front is what then will help the builder be able to take that and actually build to that specification along the way. You wouldn't ask a builder to go and build off a blank sheet of paper. So yeah, definitely not off my specification. that's for sure. So the interesting thing about outputs is, I feel like the world is trending more towards output and outcome-based delivery. Yes. I was at a really interesting AI conference a got to go to the House of Commons down the street, which is quite cool. It's sponsored by a Labour MP, Lee Barron. He was sponsoring this research, which is carried out by Bloor Research. And one of the things that came out of it was that previously, the way that work got done historically, it was just based around a person's time. So Johnny Dunning, 5 days a week. But with the use of AI, if what used to take me 5 days a week only now takes me 3 days a week or 4 days a week, whatever it is, then is time the best thing to just be measuring that on?
Indeed, yeah.
And whereas actually it's like, what am I achieving? Maybe I can do more.
Yeah.
So like outputs is just becoming more of a thing, and the world has moved to more of a services-based economy, and the flexibility required in having that outsourced network, what I feel like it means people don't have to move away from is kind of the approach that I perceive as sometimes a bit lazy historically, where organisations will just say, just get some bums on seats doing something. And it's like, well, what are you trying to achieve? What's the outcome? And again, I think that ties back into business strategy, doesn't it? In the terms of you're probably sitting down with some of your stakeholders and trying to get them thinking about how what they do relates to the strategy.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually, because I see my team's job to be fulfilling that role, as you say, to sit down with our stakeholders internally and understand what their challenges are, and actually start working with on their requirements before they even know they need to go to the market. So, so you're talking to these guys every day, every week, and getting a feel for their challenges and their problems, and helping solve those problems with them. And then when you're then looking to go to the market to fulfil that service, you're already thinking about it. So when you put it, it's easier. It becomes easier for them to put it down into a contract. Ultimately, that delivers what you need to do, whether it's outcome based or sometimes actually a time and materials engagement will work for that specific project. But ultimately, the more you work with procurement, I think the better outcomes we'll all get together. And there's a bit of education along the way to see procurement as someone that can help them, rather than as a post box.
And how has your organisation achieved that? Because it sounds, I mean, you mentioned you were just invited to the table, which is brilliant to see. But this type of enlightened approach, I think it's an enlightened approach within procurement that's very closely linked to business objectives. Firstly, either that, I don't know what came first, it's chicken and egg here, as to were you invited to the table because there was that approach that was specifically within the culture of the procurement organisation and the CPO, or is it that was just what the business asked of you guys?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think it's a bit of both, to be honest with you, because I think we delivered a lot during. So when LSEG acquired Refinitiv, there was a large integration project from 2021, January 21 or February 21, apologies, for 3 years, and we had a lot of. We had to deliver a lot to the market in that time in terms of synergies, both from a cost base and infrastructure, offices, data centers, as well as on the customer side in terms of integrating and having one voice to the customer. So lots of large programs within that, and we had to deliver, and procurement were helping the business achieve those objectives over that 3-year period. And ultimately, the execs, I think, could see the value of what we were delivering, and then would give us the mandate then to continue that evolution in terms of what needs to be delivered in the future. And I think a good example, which I spoke to you previously about, was I think from my area in the workforce piece. A CFO comes in and just wants, okay, tell me where my workforce are, and people are going, okay, great. HR are coming with their data on the people that are on the books in terms of FTEs and FTCs, and we had good data on contingent labour, and it was like, the CFO was like, that's great, but where's the external workforce here? And it was some difficult conversations, but ultimately that set off our workforce programme in the sense of then looking at our total workforce across the group, and trying to work through. Okay, well look, regardless of whether they're FTE contract or external, we need that information in one place, and we can then, having that data, going back to data again, having that data, you can then you can start looking forwards, and that this program it ultimately involved had executive, our CFO, our chief operating officer, our chief people officer, all three, and our chief procurement officer, all involved there in terms of looking at it from a you have the chief people officer who was a sponsor of this ultimately, in sense of looking at the whole people workforce there. You've got a CFO who wants to understand all of that with what the financial impacts of that, and what sensitivity analysis can be done to make sure that we're as efficient as possible, and the operating officer working across that, and having procurement in the middle of that as well, helping to deliver this has been really interesting actually, and thought-provoking in terms of what our role is in that, in terms of managing that whole total workforce, and how you then have to get in conversations. You can't limit your knowledge on your bit within the external workforce. You have to understand the impacts, and when you want to outsource something versus when you want to start actually insource it, and making decisions on what you do internally versus what you do externally, and how.
Yeah, and I feel like that's getting into the really clever stuff. It's like I had a conversation with Lisa Williams from Dow Chemicals in the US. Really interesting conversation, and she's very super passionate about this kind of total workforce approach. But she also has a clear understanding that for most organisations, they'll have their internal workforce pretty dialed. FTEs, FTCs, also their contingent workforce. It's a pretty mature setup in terms of technology, service providers, all that sort of thing. The big gap for most people is services procurement, where it's actually these outsourced service providers. And I had another conversation with another services procurement SME guy called Alan Withers, who works for Matchtech, and he was talking to me about some of the studies he's been doing on the numbers when you look at and go, okay, how many contingent workers do we have? And then look at how many people do we have doing work for us outside of the contingent workers and our full-time who are in our external service providers. How many people are accessing the buildings? I hear this all the time. People go, how many workers do we have? And it's X many. And then they say, well, why have we got 40% more people accessing our systems and doing this and doing that? I find that fascinating. But what you guys have been doing is quite a well-coordinated approach to that, it seems to me.
And I think we've got that because we've had the executive mandate of various members of our exco going, well, we need this information and we think it's important, so we'll invest in that part of we'll invest to deliver what we need to do, and the outcome will be a workforce that they can have complete visibility on and ensure that they're working on the right things. And what I find really interesting actually is that when we talk about workforce, there's no debate about the internal workforce and how it's FTE versus FTC. Yet when we talk about the external workforce, between you and I, we'll say contingent labour, we'll say IT services, is it consultancies? And so what we've tried to do is actually have a definition of it, so we can all speak the same language within the company. So FTE, and FTC is part of that really. But FTE, you've got contractors, which some people say contingent labour, and we've got consultant advisory versus consultant delivery. So advisory is when you give advice, delivery is where they're actually working on a project and delivering outcomes. And then you've got your outsource providers who are doing a managed service. And ultimately, sometimes you don't really care whether they're providing 10 people or 100, because ultimately they're working to a set of SLAs to deliver whatever service that be, whether it's your tech bar or your facilities management within your office or data centres. So I think that's helped us actually. And when people say, okay, well actually I want that piece of data, you can say actually what bit of data do you need, or what information do you need to help you make a decision, because it's neatly defined and structured in a way that helps people again make decisions quicker.
You just brought me onto and neatly onto another topic that I was interested to cover with you, which is this kind of grey area. I had a really interesting conversation with a service procurement guy from Amazon. We were at an event and we were just chatting away, and we were talking about the difference between procured services, or sometimes people will call it statement of work, versus contingent worker. And we were kind of debating back and forward, because obviously is perfectly legitimate within a services contract, within a statement of work, that some of it might be T&M based. You know, you could have outputs that are blocks of consultant time, for example. Equally, you could have pure project deliverables, you could have KPIs, you could have sprints in an agile process. It could be a varied, that's the whole point of deliverables and milestones. They need to be flexible in nature, but clearly defined and measurable.
Yes.
And where he got to was the difference between a worker under an SOW versus a contingent labour is under an SOW, you don't care who it is. As in, you don't care who the person is. As in, like for a contingent worker, you're hiring Johnny Dunning, and I've got a particular set of skills, and I'm charging X amount per day. Under a services contract, there's some workers, and they might need to, if they're doing a T&M bit, it might need to be a senior consultant. But actually, you don't care whether it's Johnny Dunning or not. It just needs to be the person doing the work. But it gets complicated, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I respectfully disagree with that, because I think, again, this is a grey area. So I'm not saying we've perfected it, and I'm right. I just think it's a bit more complex than that, and I'm somebody who likes to simplify as much as possible. But I think no, in a statement of work, you might have a T&M basis in there, and you might have a I think you do care who works on it, because I think when you choose your supplier you want to work with and you get a good one, I think you actually want to make sure that you keep Johnny Dunning on that SOW, as opposed to whether they're coming via the contractor route. So I think there's a bit more of a nuance there, in a sense of, actually we try as much as possible to name them in the SOW, so that we can make sure we keep Johnny, because we know Johnny's done a good job on this other piece of work, and actually he's worked for this services company, so we can't bring him in through another route, because you're an employee of that company that we're using for this service. So we've tried to break it down by, again, is contractor versus consultant delivery. And again, this is not perfect, but it's maybe how many people you're looking for. So where you're looking for a single resource working under a manager's jurisdiction, if you like,
direction, control, basically.
Then we go to our managed service provider and use that form to bring in the worker. And when we're looking to bring in multiple people, maybe a squad, if it's a tech piece of work, or and if it's under a T&M basis, because the commercial construct is a secondary conversation, because ultimately you're saying, okay, what are you looking to deliver? Do you have a set of requirements? If you're not sure, let's put them on a T&M basis for some of it, or all of the engagements, and then you might move them on. But ultimately, you still care who you get, because if you've got a squad,
you need the right people.
Yeah, exactly.
You need to know that your supplier is putting their top team on it.
Yes,
I've heard Johnny Dunning is really good, so you need to make sure he's involved. But I mean, I always look at it very simply as, what's the contractual vehicle you're using?
Yeah.
If you're contracting under an output-based contract or a statement of work, that is what it is. Yeah. If you're contracting for a specific individual on a time basis, that is a different thing. So it's like, it's either a statement of work type contract, or it's a contractor agreement, effectively. So I like to try and look at it as like, where's the contract base for it? But like you say, and this is the grey area, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Where I like the fact that you're kind of pushing back on that, and you're discussing the nuances of it, because that shows that you guys are on it. Yeah. You're looking at it, you're assessing it, and it's an important thing. Whereas for a lot of organisations, it gets like brushed under the rug, and then you get chaos. Yeah. Where people are going, oh, there's a headcount freeze, but I can run a PO at.
Yes. And I've seen that in the past, where somebody said, okay, we need to do a headcount freeze just to control costs for a period of time. But then what you do is you have people coming around the avenue and putting a purchase order agreement in place with an SOW attached to it, and you can hide those people, which you've moved from, maybe because your contractors and your FTEs are managed tightly, but if the services side are not, then you've got leakage there. And when the CFO is looking at the books and going, okay, why have we not saved money through this hiring freeze? It's because of those back channels. If they're not controlled properly, then you're creating issues.
Yeah, and it's that whole classic squeezing the balloon type conversation, isn't it? It morphs somewhere else.
Indeed.
But the thing is, the people, the buying managers, they're just trying to get the work done, aren't they? Yeah. Unfortunately, it then falls into the trap, if they're going down that route of a PO value is that I don't need any procurement oversight of, is, I don't know, 100K or 50K or whatever it is, and every piece of work is
Yeah.
49K, you know.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And some companies have pretty high limits on that. I was in the US recently, did a really interesting roundtable with some procurement experts of various different organizations. And for some big organizations, you know, $500,000 as basically a kind of like self-sign-off purchase order is not unheard of.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of organizations, it's probably more like 250 and below, but that can mean a lot of kind of invisible leakage, basically.
Yeah. I think what we found over the years, and it's kind of nebulous what company it comes from, but I think where you need your execs to lean in is the prioritization question, because ultimately when you're looking for an external worker, it's because you don't have the internal capacity to do the day job. So you go, okay, well actually I can't do this. I need to go and bring an external worker in. But ultimately, when you've got to manage within a tight budget, financial constraints, it's then important that you're the senior people, whether they're exec or director level or whatever it may be, they need to set the prioritization. So you kind of go, look, I've got these 10 things on my list I need to do.
Right.
We need to prioritize 3 or 4 of them now to get these done, because they're going to deliver the greatest outcome. And actually, maybe the people you're looking to hire on these and bring in through the back door, we shouldn't be doing that, because ultimately that's not part of the prioritization we need to do. And we can bring them now through the front door because we've prioritized the work we need to do and deliver, and everyone's happy that we bring these people on, regardless of the commercial contracts. You're bringing the people in externally for the right reasons to deliver to those priority points. And I think we've had great support. Actually, it's not even about great support. They've understood that, so that we can support that endeavour along the way with a mandate to do so.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you've got that mandate to do so. You've got that support. But for me, it's just business logic, really.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, business logic is easier when you're not a giant corporation.
Yeah.
When you're the bigger the company, the more difficult that business logic is to maintain, because ultimately the C-suite should have all the data on all the. I always refer to them as like work delivery channels. So whether you're doing it under an outsourced SOW, whether it's a contractor, whether it's an FTE, whatever the different channels are for your organisation, might be gig workers, or there might be an AI channel, you know, in the not too distant future for some organisations. The people that are running the show need to be able to just marshal their resources.
Yes.
Like, what's our total capacity and capability?
Yeah.
And I remember a CEO, I've mentioned it many times, but a CEO saying to me, Johnny, I just need to know what resources have I got and what's the most effective use of all my resources. How can I deploy them? Yeah. So again, it's very strategic, isn't it? Because you're talking about the organisation prioritising what it needs to get done.
Yeah.
That is firstly a sign of a good organisation, having a strategy, communicating the strategy. But for a lot of organisations, where they then fall down is when they need to execute on that strategy. They have a very low level of visibility on all of their channels and capability. They have suppliers all over the place that no one knows about, apart from one person who's got them in their little diary, or in their inbox, all that sort of thing. And if stuff's happening just at that PO level with very little information, if a CFO then comes to a CPO and starts asking detailed questions, what are they going to do? Go and try and look back through all the scan signed PDFs that have got hardly any information. It gets pretty difficult at that point.
100%. And your tooling strategy is so important in terms of what tools you need and how you manage that workflow. Because doing it through a PO, we know it's not going to be fit for purpose, because you can't capture the level of detail you need to be able to have that visibility across what people are actually doing and where they are, let alone how much they cost per on a rate basis, rather than just a gross number on a purchase order.
Yeah. One of the other things you mentioned was about the kind of downstream implications. So I'm interested to know, for you and your team, when you're helping your buyer engage a service provider, scope it out, it sounds like you've got involvement through the delivery phase as well. Is that right, in terms of you're kind of helping them keep an eye on it, helping them shift, bring in new requirements and kind of take things further as they go? Changes, stuff like that?
I think we do. And I think it's evolved a lot over the years, because I think in the past, maybe a source and a procurement function would be seen to let's get the contract done, and we walk away and maybe let supplier management, vendor management, or the buyer manage that delivery element. So I just think, because what we're delivering now, it's always been complex, but I think there's more of an understanding that procurement, we need to stay close to these projects so we understand it, because ultimately we need to be there ready for when to make sure things are going well through the life cycle of that, but also being ready for the next phase. What's the next phase going to be? And by sometimes I hate some of the corporate terms, but partnering with your stakeholders and being with them for the journey is so important, because if you walk away and you're told 6 months' time, a year's time, that there's something's gone wrong or you need to renew the contract, and if you've not stayed reasonably close to it, then you're starting from scratch each time, and you're not offering any real value, and you're not challenging, you're not able to then influence that piece of work and the outcome you're trying to achieve as well. So I think it's really important you do stay close to the project you're working on, and managing capacity though is tough doing that, because obviously there's a lot to it, and you're stepping out. Sometimes you might be feeling like people are stepping outside of the constraints of what their role should be. But I'm all for the more you get involved and the more you understand the project through delivery, the more value you can add at the when you get to the point of contracting or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, just purely from a tech angle on that, I think it's really interesting in the sense that for us as a tech provider in the service procurement space, we always look at full life cycle.
Yeah.
All of the upfront stuff, all of the sourcing, the contracting, and then critically the downstream. It never ceases to amaze me how many organisations, their procurement function, do not look at the downstream.
Yeah.
Because it's partly because they're just targeted on up to the point of contracting.
Indeed.
But it's like, that doesn't work in services. It changes, and it gets so. I've gone with consultancy A over consultancy B because they've got a lower day rate. Oh well, guess what? It's taken them twice as long as they quoted for. Yeah. They've got 5 extensions, and it really amazes me how many organisations, the procurement, are not incentivized or motivated to follow the projects through to completion, and that's where I think having this focus on what are the requirements around buying services is really important, because if you're procuring goods and materials, it's a different setup.
Yeah.
And I think the way that the technology supports that is very mature, in the sense that you have catalogue buying, guided buying, but the thing you're buying is easy to define and measure, and it doesn't change. It's you're buying 50, 2 kilo red widgets, and it is what it is. You can compare price, you can compare quality and stuff like that quite easily. There are complexities around the supply chain.
Yeah.
But that's almost like, I always say, that's like the reverse of services, because the supply chain is generally quite simple, but the thing you're buying is hard to define, hard to measure.
Yeah.
And I just think that's missed. If people aren't following up the downstream, they're only getting a tiny bit of the picture.
Well, absolutely. So you can't walk away. I think you need to stay involved, and I think I don't think it's not valued. I think it's more a case of maybe you've got a capacity constraint, because your procurement team, that function, that services team is not large enough to be able to stay involved, and I think that's an ongoing challenge, because you can only have so many people in the team doing this stuff, and they've got to focus on what they can, but ultimately I really do ask and challenge my team to stay involved as much as possible, because then that way you can help your stakeholder throughout the life cycle of their journey, whether it's implementation or something else.
Yeah, and I also think when you look at that capacity issue, that is also where automation, AI, can be really useful. And it's interesting to still see some resistance to that sort of thing within some procurement teams, because you will tend to get some procurement teams that might think, is this going to take my job away? Yeah. But I guess if they're doing very transactional based activities, that's their thought process. Yeah. Whereas for you guys in your team, you're thinking strategically.
Oh, absolutely.
So if you can automate stuff, the team are probably going to be like, great, I've got more data.
They'll be delighted. The guys in the team are, in terms of capacity, they're struggling with, it's the mundane, or the repetitive tasks of maybe it's negotiating a basic part of an SOW or the upfront piece, and that stuff is not the value-added piece. The value-added piece, as you say, is working through delivery. How do you want to construct the SOW? How do you want to make sure you've got the right structure to whether it's milestones or something else that actually deliver it? And then, as you say, staying with the stakeholder through the life cycle is where we want to focus their time. The more automation AI you can bring into the process, I think the guys and gals would love it ultimately, and they're definitely not pushing back on how we can bring in those kind of tools and support that can help them ultimately.
I think that's a very healthy way to look at it.
Yeah.
Because but it's you guys, to a certain extent, you're not constrained by a limited attitude within your C-suite or within your organisation.
Yeah.
You're quite a liberated procurement function in the sense that it's just like, go and do it, guys, and be strategic and think about the business outcomes, and like you're being asked to level up the service, which for me, that plays into the conversation where people are looking towards how do we, getting to value rather than savings. Yeah. And lots of people talk a good game about getting to value, but when you ask them to really break it down and define it, they kind of can't, or they don't. Their organisation hasn't given them the facility to be able to truly get towards that, and it's like aspirational. But I think when you look at the detail of what you guys are doing, I think you could put the argument together that is driving towards a value-based consideration of what procurement are delivering, rather than just, because for a lot of organisations, and I don't, it's not the fault of these organisations or these procurement teams in a lot of cases, it's just the way they're targeted and structured and limited. It's like, how much did you save up front at the point of contract? That just is not reflective of the end result in services.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And you always, again, you've got this constructive challenge of essentially making sure you've got a competitive rate. I think that you can't move away from the fact that you need to deliver against your budgets. And when we report into the CFO, so we're very close to the numbers and how we need to deliver those, and especially with my finance background. But at the same time, you need to ensure you're getting quality from in service procurement. You're looking at the quality of the delivery, and that sometimes that's not going to come cheap. But you need to benchmark it so that it's competitive at least. And I think that's important that we need to work through that with and using the scale of your organisation to get that competitive rate.
Yeah, you're bringing up loads of great points here, which is why I keep making notes. So rate, I want to come back to looking at that, but I also want to come back to quality, because that is the metric that often gets left out in services procurement. It's like, what saving did we make up front, which is not an accurate reflection of total savings, in my opinion, anyway, because anything could happen post-contract. Yeah. But the quality is very interesting, because you've got the quantitative metrics that if you're capturing this stuff effectively in a platform, for example, you'll be able to see for every supplier, for every project, for every milestone and deliverable, were they on time? Were they on budget? How much did it shift? Yeah. How many changes? What was their average cost overrun? All this sort of stuff. But then you've got the qualitative information on the people within your team, your business, saying whether they did a good job or not. That's the quality metric, really, isn't it? Because otherwise it's like something that, for a lot of organisations, it's way down the line. Yeah. The project's gone off the rails, the settlements left, right and centre, everyone feels hard done by, and it's pretty much impossible, because it's not documented, to go back and assess what the quality was or why it went wrong. Yeah. How do you guys kind of pull together that quality assessment, as it were?
It's tough, is the short answer, because you can use various kind of things. So you've got Net Promoter Score you can use, but again, that's very subjective. And what we've tried, there's a couple of ways you can do it. So you got the Net Promoter Score. You've got, I think you need to find as much quantitative way to do it as possible. So
of course you do. You used to work in finance.
Indeed.
No, I 100% agree.
I agree.
Yeah,
and I think tech services are good. Again, we keep going back to tech services because I think it's clearly a passion for both of us. But I think what we've got now is, I think there's various tools out there now, and one we use within the company that can measure developer and productivity.
Oh, right.
So we find that really useful, because that, again, is something we've not been able to measure well in years gone by, but now actually our engineering function can go, okay, well, we've got developers both internally and externally. It's in the environments that they're developing on, and they can see actually what's the velocity, what's right first time in terms of coding, etc., which gives us that quantitative measurement. But ultimately, you still need subjective. Okay, well, when it's maybe a bit of advisory work or delivery work, which is not necessarily measurable. I think what we've started doing now with our consulting preferred supplier list is every engagement that finishes, we ask the stakeholder to complete a very quick survey, captures their feedback on how well this particular project went, and we can collect, again, it's more data to collect, and then feed back to our consultancies to say, well, this is where you've done well, and this is where there's been a few engagements here that you've not done so well. And is there a theme developing from the supply base? You can actually feed it, and then you're it's not just beating them up at the till. You're actually getting some feedback you can give back to them to say, well, next time you get an engagement in this particular area, these are where you need to focus your efforts on and improving that, but on that basis. But also, this is what you seem to be working really well with this team or on these particular kind of projects, and that's actually, you're doing well there. So keep it up and look to continually evolve and improve in that space too.
And to a certain extent, you could look at that as challenging the supplier a bit more.
Yeah.
But surely it's got to be an overall benefit for supplier relationships in terms of going to that depth, because you're not just looking at the areas where they can improve, which should be good for them anyway, because it means they can do a better job for you to get the feedback. But you're also looking at where they've done a good job.
Yeah, 100%. Well, when we talk about earlier, we were talking about the issues with people looking to bring in services through the back door.
Yeah.
We want this all to come through the front door because, and ultimately because we want our stakeholders to trust the suppliers we're putting in front of them and the options that we're giving them from a procurement perspective. So, and if you're able to then give that feedback to the supplier to say, this is where you're doing well, this is where you're not doing so well, and you need to perform in these areas and improve and improve your performance here, that's only good then when our stakeholder needs to find a solution and to deliver an outcome. So, because we don't want them to say, okay, actually, your list was, the guys you sent us to were poor, so we've got our mates over there that we want to use. So you're trying to find a balance where you're just giving your stakeholder the right options with the right framework, the right commercials, the right quality, that they can deliver what they need to deliver. Because ultimately, they shouldn't care who's doing it as long as they're getting the quality. But if they don't feel they're getting that quality, that's when they'll come with their own options. And that's why these close relationships with your stakeholders and your suppliers will help you get to that, get to the right delivery framework. Again, we haven't perfected it by any stretch of the imagination, but I think we're making headway in cracking that nut.
Yeah, it feels like a very grown-up approach to it, and like I say, I find it very, I applaud your attitude of you've got very much kind of like just wanting to progress and learn and improve all these things, which is great, but whether you've got to the end point of solving these problems or not, you guys are trying to solve these problems. And I think that's the important thing. And I think that's where it's interesting for other people to hear what you've been doing, because it's like, well, you know what, you can go out and try and solve these problems. If you get the right executive support, if your business is set up in the right way and your procurement function are fit for purpose to do it, you can go after these things. They're not easy, but they're worthwhile.
Yes.
And I think that's the end game of it, really, isn't it? Yeah. All of this stuff is complicated, but it's it's not quite flying a rocket to Mars. It is doable.
Yeah,
but
and flying a rocket to Mars is good. Maybe that's moonshots, but actually to get there, there's quick wins you can do along the way that helps you and ultimately the business deliver what needs to be delivered. And making those quick wins helps you get the confidence along the way to then keep going. And you may not get to Mars, but you'll get to another planet that's closer.
Yeah, and I think with the way the market is so competitive, the way there's so much change in the market, the big thing it always comes back to for me is if organisations aren't addressing services procurement, like you guys are addressing it, you're sort of saying it's not perfect, but we're working on it and we're trying to improve it and we're getting value from it. For organisations that aren't doing that or have got blockers in the way of them doing it or have not even thought about it, I personally think they're going to struggle to be competitive in the market, because just the speed of change, the demand for the skills and the capability and the capacity from the supply chain, they are finite. Yeah. So where people are, bringing in new technologies or doing new things, it's kind of like as much of a war for talent within the supply chain as it is within the permanent headcount.
Agreed.
So I do think fundamentally the drivers for this are top level business drivers. Yeah. Can your organisation compete effectively in the market? And it feels very much like you guys are looking at this strategically, which I think is great. And also I think it just gives procurement the ability to sort of like elevate their function, particularly when it comes to services. Like I say, I think you've got a very, very supportive exec structure in place. But, there's so much value. I always find it fascinating. Going back to data, I love the data myself. the amount of data that procurement are privy to is astonishing.
Yeah.
And you sit at this intersection where it's like, and I'm talking about, metrics, and I'm also talking about more the sort of like qualitative data that you're getting, because you're getting feedback from all different angles. You're getting feedback from the supply chain on what your internal stakeholders are doing, how the teams are performing, how they're interacting with them. You're getting information from your internal stakeholders on how the supply chain are performing. So you've got this kind of 360-degree view on how effective the company is at doing stuff. And obviously you're looking at how you're doing stuff as well. I think that data is really fascinating, because for a lot of organizations, if they just take things on a very surface level, and for example, if they're not looking at, not trying to measure quality, although it's never easy, then they can end up making snap decisions, and suppliers get blamed for stuff where it's actually not the supplier's fault, and the inefficiency might sit in the organization because a particular team are too busy on something else to bother with the consulting firm that's supposed to be spending time with them, and it ends up taking loads longer, or they didn't scope it properly and it all shifts and that costs more money. I feel like that's quite an important consideration when it comes to the sort of like total view of this.
And it's so important that you understand all of those moving parts, and I think being in services procurement is an education all the time, because you're trying to solve those problems while those problems are happening, and bringing those bits together you've just mentioned is kind of what makes the job so interesting, really.
And when an organisation says, okay, we've got to make cost cuts, for example, I've seen plenty of situations where the organisation will basically say, we need to cut our consulting spend. And if they don't have visibility, if they've just got like PO level data, then they can say, how much did we spend with Accenture last year? People are going to know that. What were they working on? What projects did they deliver? What were the outcomes of those projects? That's different. And so if you need to cut, for example, consulting spend, how do you know what to cut? Are you cutting stuff that's like actually really driving your bottom line or really helping new product growth versus stuff that's maybe a bit more wastage? It's just, you've got to have that visibility and that information. And it's like companies are struggling on. It's amazing when we see quite often big, highly complex organizations, sometimes technology-based organizations, that are trying to run this stuff on email, spreadsheets, and just Word documents and PDFs and stuff like that. And it's just the level of information, the volume of data is just too big, and you just can't do it. And they kind of, I feel like from that point of view, there's almost like a chunk of their workforce capacity or their work capacity where they're just basically flying blind. And it's I find it difficult to understand why some organisations aren't trying to address that. But I guess it feels like getting started is quite difficult if you haven't done it before.
Yeah, I think so. Because some of this stuff is not. It sounds obvious, and I said just the example I gave earlier in terms of somebody saying just give me my workforce data and not being able to provide that straight away. Kind of it's those simple questions that then everyone's going, oh, hang on a second, and before you know it, you realise what data you're missing to actually help you make those critical decisions. But where do you start? At what point? At what point do you start? Where do you look? Where do you go first? And actually clean data or better. You're not going to get 100% data. Maybe that's the utopian we're not going to get to. But actually, you want to get as close as possible to that, and 80-20, 90-10 is okay actually in terms of making some of those decisions.
So I don't want to kind of spring this on you too much, but off the top of your head, if you were advising somebody else in another organisation who's saying, look, our services procurement's all over the place, we've got no visibility, it's not even really centralised in terms of who's in charge of it. If you were, helicoptered in to say, okay, well, if you were going to say the first start point you might look at, what would it be? Would it be basically trying to work out what data do we have to start with, at least? Yeah,
I think it's data. It starts with data. What data do you have? What quality is your data in? How are you collecting this data? And again, is it email? Is it manual spreadsheets? Is it some kind of Power BI? Do you have a vendor management system? What data do you have? How are you collecting it? And how good is it? I think you have to start. It always starts with data. Tell me what you've got, and then we can work through and go, okay, is this good enough? Do we need to enhance it? And actually, can we start making some decisions based on what data you have? If you don't, then you're always flying blind, aren't you? You need all that. You need as much information. You need that information. You just need to be you need to be considered in terms of what information you do need, because sometimes you can boil the ocean and say, okay, I need, what are the critical bits of information you need? Is it, and it's going to be along. It's not rocket science. It's going to be, who are these people? Where do they come from in terms of the supplier? Where they're located? What's their rates? And ideally, what projects are they working on? What's their job category? Job family, etc. So, but then there's other things that people might be detail you kind of would like. It's a nice to have, but you don't really need it to help you make decisions along the way. So it's being very measured in terms of what information you do need to help you make those decisions, and let's not try and boil the ocean. It's certainly initially anyway.
You can always upgrade as you go, can't you?
Well,
so it's like if you do an initial take of what data do we have, then that helps you have the next part of the conversation, which is what data do we need. And then, like you say, you can have a rationalisation to say, well, out of those 10 bits of data that we'd ideally like, we can get 5 of them pretty quickly. Let's do that first. Like you said, in terms of kind of like getting to the moon, it's a step-by-step process.
We decided we worked. We had a view of what was critical data, but we also asked our HR function, people function, our finance, our functional stakeholders, whether it's the business or tech, to say, what do you think are the key bits of information we need? And okay, that's the starting point. This is what we think now. We're going to prioritise getting this information first, and that helped us in terms of having a first view that was relevant and useful for our execs.
So one of the things I'm kind of fascinated to understand more for you and your team and your business is the kind of what's next, in the sense that, okay, you guys have got some pretty damn good data, you've got some great processes. I know it's a constant process of improvement for you guys to try and constantly be building this and making it better. But where do you see the next steps of that kind of in relation to that total workforce sort of like strategic decision-making process?
So what we're doing right now. So I'll tell you what we're doing right now, and I think where we're trying to get to is, I think our tooling is so important. So we've kind of gone, okay, well, this is what we need, this empirical data to allow us to make the right decisions. So how do you get hold of that data? And it goes back to how do you get it, and what do you need to help you along the way? So the tooling we're looking at, without naming the suppliers and who's providing it, is a workforce planning tool that allows our hiring managers to put in their information in terms of this is what we need, and this is what then we've got a plan then. And this is when I talk about it, everything I talk about now is total workforce. So regardless of if it's internal or external.
So is that almost like a triaging type system or an intake where you're basically saying this is what I need to do? Not
so much. It's more it's a planning tool,
right,
which allows the hiring manager to use it for budgetary kind of, and I say budgetary, for forecasting purposes, to say, I've currently got this is my current workforce, and this is what I'm going to need in this next cycle, whether it's quarterly, 6 months, annually cycle. So they're continually going, okay, well, this is my workforce, I've got these open roles, but these are the ones I'm going to need in the future. And then that can kind of gets periodically signed off, so then it flows in. So and that's going to capture our total workforce. And I'm excluding kind of outsourcing from this, because I think that's completely different, and we don't really necessarily care about whether it's one person or 1,000 doing. Very simplistic way to describe it, but you get my point.
No, I know what you mean.
But then that kind of gives you the visibility again at both exec level and on the ground level, where you can actually see what your workforce plan is looking like, and then you can measure up against what programs are these people needed to be working on, which IXCO have kind of agreed a prioritisation for them. We're looking at our vendor management solutions system as well, in terms of whether we upgrade to the next version or whatever, that actually can make sure that we're using it in the right way. Because we implemented our vendor management system 10 years ago, and it's been changed so many times. It's so bespoke.
Probably tweaked for you guys. Hey, look, speaking from a software angle, it's there's a real balance point between the software company driving where a product should go versus customers pulling it in a different direction, and there's got to be a balance struck.
Exactly. So I think we're saying, okay, you know what, we want to strip it back to basics now. We've made so many changes over the last 10 years that we need to move to a kind of out of the box solution. It still might need to be slightly adapted, but we're going to be really strict about using it out of the box. So that's another piece we're looking at as well. at the moment, and ultimately trying to get to a position where we've got an end-to-end, work from forecasting right to the whole life cycle being captured looking at the whole end-to-end process basically, and then you can start thinking about, okay, well, how can we automate this bit, this part of the life cycle? How can we to make focus our value proposition in a different area? So yeah, I think it's tooling strategy is what's important to us in terms of getting there and simplifying how our end-to-end processes to get to a position where we can not only see the current workforce, but we can see what they're going to be working on next as well. And then there's all other kind of snazzy things you can do in terms of, okay, well, if you've had these people working on these projects internally or externally, how do you make sure you can keep that knowledge and bring it back where you need it and move it on to the next project that's coming down the trap later on?
Yeah, and I think tooling within procurement in general is very important.
Yeah,
and you had this kind of digital transformation that came out of the kind of manufacturing sector, where you basically had the ERP systems coming along, and then you had the kind of procure to pay and source to pay suites that came out of those ERP systems. Yeah. But I feel like they're quite heavily predicated towards procurement of goods and materials, catalogue buying, guided buying. It works for that. Yeah. Whereas it's interesting to see the tooling coming in other areas, whether it's contingent workforce, whether it's services procurement, specific, and loads of other, procure tech's growing massively. Because one of the things I always think is that with procurement, I always see procurement as quite a relatively young profession.
Yeah, absolutely.
Compared to some other functions within organisations like finance or even things like marketing. If you look at like the marketing technology stack, it's way more mature than procurement, but it's all happening for procurement now. I think that's really important because when you're hiring people, you're bringing in people who are, tech native. They're expecting to see good systems and processes. They don't want to walk into a manual environment, do they?
Yes, absolutely. And I think what's great is that you're starting to see some procurement tooling coming up, which is looking more orchestration as opposed to, So I think that's where the game changer will be for us to help us actually smooth out the process and experiences from the actual buyers, from the stakeholders that need to procure a service. Because as you say, the ERP is not able to do that. I don't think well enough, and they don't try to necessarily, which is fine.
Yeah, and you kind of you hear some people talking about the death of the suite and this, that, and the other. There's always arguments, and it's like every company's different.
Yes,
but ultimately, if organisations are looking at their tooling and trying to make things more sophisticated and take out the transactional activity, so people can focus on more strategic, so they can use data, then that just makes sense in terms of trying to compete in the market.
Yeah.
So. Just to kind of round things up, we could definitely keep going, but just to kind of round things up. So the fact that your organisation has come to look at the world of services quite specifically, and to really look at trying to build that out and build up the level of data, the level of quality, and enable that decision-making process. Is that something that you think other companies are trying to do? Have you seen that similar focus within other organisations, or does it come up in peer group conversations, or do you think it's still something that's quite early in terms of a thought process?
Yeah, I'd love to be able to say here that no, we're unique. We're the only ones doing this. I think the more my peers I speak to, I think a lot more people are looking. I wouldn't say everyone, a lot more people are looking at this as a challenge and a challenge they need to solve. Obviously, different companies and different groups, different procurement organisations are at different stages in that life cycle. But I think there's more. I think service procurement is becoming more well known, but still probably not as well known as it should be ultimately. And Johnny, this is what this is a challenge you've taken up. I'm absolutely happy to support getting service procurement out there.
No, I really appreciate it, and it's it's this type of conversation and just bringing people into the conversation when you do have these chats and when you do sit in round tables and things like that. And for me, as I was saying to you earlier, kind of when practitioners really start getting into the I'm fairly nerdy on this subject, but ultimately I'm coming from a tech point of view. I'm not a practitioner. I can kind of hang on to the conversation to a certain level, and then it just goes into procurement turbo, and I tend to be kind of just trailing along at that point. But it's brilliant listening to practitioners discussing this stuff, because it's art of the possible. What support are you getting? And just the fact of services procurement almost like as an emerging discipline. Services aren't going away. It's only getting bigger. It's only changing faster. And so I think it's a great time for people to be able to talk about it. And I think there's real value in listening to the journey that people like yourself have been on and the things that you've come up against, and also areas that have really helped, like having that great exec backing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really appreciative of you coming in and having this conversation. I have a feeling there may be like a follow-up conversation that we might need to have as well, getting into detail on some certain areas. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure to go through it with you. And yeah, hopefully some really interesting stuff in here for people to kind of just think about, have questions about, and take away and build into their own discussions.
Yeah, I hope so. It's been really fun doing it. Like I said, it's my first podcast, but it's been really enjoyable. Thank you for facilitating, and yeah, hopefully maybe you'll have me again in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
Cheers, Johnny. Thank you.